Some debts can never be fully repaid. Some thank yous take decades to deliver. And some promises, made in the quiet corners of a young heart, wait patiently for the perfect moment to be fulfilled. For Michael Jordan, 6-time NBA champion, Olympic, gold medalist, and global icon, one such promise had waited nearly 40 years. A promise to thank the teacher who believed in him when he needed it most. The teacher who gave him words when basketball gave him wings. The teacher who saw greatness in him before anyone else did, even himself. On a sunny Tuesday morning, indeed, Wilmington, North Carolina, that promise was finally about to be kept. And what would happen next would change not just 2 lives, but thousands more. Michael Jordan's sleek black SUV pulled up to Emsley A. Laney High School in Wilmington, North Carolina. The morning sun bounced off the vehicle's tinted windows. It was Tuesday, just after 9 a.m., when most students were settling into their second-period classes. Michael adjusted his sunglasses and took a deep breath. His hands, the same ones that had held 6 NBA championship trophies, now gripped the steering wheel tightly. "You sure about this, Mr. Jordan?" asked Keith, his driver and security guard of 15 years. Michael nodded. "I've been putting this off for too long." It had been almost 40 years since he walked these halls as a skinny teenager with big dreams. The brick building looked smaller than he remembered. The basketball courts where he had spent countless hours practicing after being cut from varsity team were still there, though they now had fresh pavement and new hoops. "Wait here," Michael told Keith. "This is something I need to do alone." Keith raised an eyebrow but knew better than to argue with his boss. "Yes, sir. I'll be right here if you need me." Michael stepped out of the SUV. At 62, he still moved with the grace of an athlete. His hair was now sprinkled with gray, and lines framed his eyes, but there was no mistaking the man whose face had appeared on cereal boxes, sneakers, and billboards around the world. He reached back into the car and pulled out a small package wrapped in blue paper. Then, as an afterthought, he grabbed a worn notebook from the glove compartment. Its blue cover was faded, its corners soft from decades of handling. Inside were the words that had changed his life. Words written by Mrs. Ruby Crawford, his former English teacher who believed in him when no one else did. As Michael walked toward the school's main entrance, a group of students spotted him from a classroom window. Their excited faces pressed against the glass, mouths open in disbelief. One boy pointed, jumping up and down. Even now, all these years later, kids still recognized him instantly. Michael smiled and waved, then continued toward the doors. His heart was beating faster than it should. He had faced the pressure of championship games, last-second shots with millions watching, but somehow this visit made him nervous in a different way. He hadn't told Mrs. Crawford he was coming. Now, 83 years old, she still volunteered at the school library 3 days a week, helping students who struggled with reading, just like he once did. Tuesday was one of her days. He had checked. The school secretary looked up as the door opened, then froze, her coffee mug halfway to her lips. "Good morning," Michael said with a smile. "I was hoping to surprise Mrs. Crawford. Is she in today?" The secretary, her nameplate read Mrs. Daniels, opened and closed her mouth twice before finding her voice. "Mr. Jordan, oh my goodness, yes, Mrs. Crawford should be in the library this morning." Michael thanked her and turned toward the hallway, but Mrs. Daniels called after him. "Mr. Jordan, would you mind? I hate to ask, but would you mind signing something for my grandson? He's your biggest fan." "Of course." Michael signed the notebook she quickly produced. He had signed millions of autographs over the years, but he never forgot what his father James had taught him. Always be gracious. because people remember how you treat them. As Michael walked the familiar hallways, memories flooded back. There was the classroom where he had struggled through algebra, the gym where he had played his first varsity game after finally making the team his junior year, the cafeteria where he had sat with his friends, talking about basketball and girls and dreams that seemed impossible at the time. The school had been renovated over the years, but the bones were the same. New paint covered the walls, modern lockers had replaced the old ones, but it was still Laney High. This was where his journey began, long before the NBA championships, Olympic gold medals, and becoming a global icon. Michael paused outside the library doors. Through the small windows, he could see rows of bookshelves, computers that hadn't existed when he was a student, and tables where teenagers were studying. And there, in the corner at a small desk, sat Mrs. Crawford. Her hair was completely white now, styled in the same neat bob she had worn for decades. Reading glasses perched on her nose as she helped a young girl with a book. Even from a distance, Michael could see the patient smile he remembered so well. The smile that had given him hope when he felt like a failure. Mrs. Crawford had been different from other teachers. When he was cut from the varsity basketball team as a sophomore, most adults had told him to accept it, to be realistic about his abilities. But not Mrs. Crawford. She had seen his determination, his hunger to prove everyone wrong. Michael remembered sitting in her English class, trying to hide his disappointment after seeing the team roster without his name on it. He had stayed behind, after the bell, pretending to work on an assignment while actually fighting back tears. Mrs. Crawford had noticed. She always noticed when a student was hurting. "Words have power, Michael," she had told him that day, handing him the blue notebook he now held in his hands. "Write down your goals in this. Write down how you feel when you're sad. Write down what you'll do to prove them wrong." That notebook had become his confidant through high school and beyond. And Mrs. Crawford's belief in him had given him the confidence to become the greatest basketball player of all time. Now, it was time to thank her properly. Michael pushed open the library door. A few students looked up, then stared in shock. Whispers rippled through the room. "Is that Michael Jordan?" Mrs. Crawford didn't notice at first. She was too focused on helping the girl sound out a difficult word. Michael walked slowly towards her desk. When he was just a few feet away, he cleared his throat softly. "Excuse me, Mrs. Crawford. I believe I still owe you a book report from 1981. She looked up, confused at first. Then her eyes widened in recognition. The book she was holding fell from her hands. "Michael," she whispered. "Michael Jordan, is it really you?" Michael smiled, holding up the worn blue notebook. "You once told me that champions aren't made in gyms. They're made from something deep inside, a desire, a dream, a vision." He took a seat across from her. "I came back to tell you that you were right." Mrs. Crawford's eyes filled with tears as she reached out with trembling hands to touch the blue notebook. "You kept it all these years?" Michael nodded. "Every page, every note you wrote in the margins." He gently placed the notebook on the desk between them. "This little book changed my life." The young girl sitting next to Mrs. Crawford was frozen in shock, her mouth hanging open. Around them, students and library staff whispered excitedly, some pulling out phones to take pictures. Mrs. Crawford noticed the commotion and smiled. "Perhaps we should find somewhere more private to talk." Michael stood and offered his arm to help her up. "I'd like that." As they walked toward the door, Mrs. Crawford turned to the librarian. "Nancy, would you mind if we use the conference room for a bit?" The librarian, still staring at Michael in disbelief, nodded quickly. "Of course, Mrs. Crawford. Take all the time you need." Michael and Mrs. Crawford slipped into a small room off the main library. It had a round table, 6 chairs, and walls lined with old yearbooks. Michael pulled out a chair for his former teacher before sitting across from her. "I can't believe you're really here," Mrs. Crawford said, wiping a tear from her cheek. "After all these years." Michael smiled. "I made a promise, remember? That one day I'd come back and thank you properly." Mrs. Crawford reached for the notebook again, running her fingers over its worn cover. "Tell me what happened after that day," she said softly. "The day you got cut from varsity. I want to hear it from you." Michael leaned back in his chair, his mind traveling back 47 years to 1978. 15-year-old Michael sat in the back of Mrs. Crawford's English class, trying to hide his red eyes. Yesterday, Coach Clifton "Pop" Herring had posted the varsity basketball team roster on the gym door. Michael had pushed through the crowd of boys, confident he would see his name. But it wasn't there. Instead, his best friend Leroy Smith had made the team. At 6'7", Leroy was 7 inches taller than Michael. Coach Herring said Michael was too small for varsity. "Michael Jordan," Mrs. Crawford called, snapping him back to the present. "Would you please read the next paragraph?" Michael cleared his throat and looked down at his book, but the words blurred through his tears. He tried to blink them away quickly. "Page 42, second paragraph," Mrs. Crawford prompted gently. Michael found the place and began reading aloud, his voice cracking slightly. He stumbled over several words, especially perseverance and determination. Ironically, these were exactly what he needed right now. After class, as other students filed out, Mrs. Crawford called, "Michael, could you stay a moment?" Michael froze. Was he in trouble for not paying attention? He approached her desk nervously. "Is everything all right?" Mrs. Crawford asked, looking up at him with kind eyes. Michael considered lying, saying everything was fine. But something about Mrs. Crawford's expression made him tell the truth. "I didn't make the varsity team," he admitted, staring at the floor. "Coach says I'm too small." Mrs. Crawford was quiet for a moment. "Basketball is very important to you, isn't it?" Michael nodded. "It's everything. I play every day at the playground, on 15th Street with my older brother Larry. He always beats me, but I'm getting better." "And now you feel like your dream is over because you didn't make varsity this year?" When she put it that way, it sounded silly. But it didn't feel silly. It felt like the end of the world. "My father always told me I could be special at something," Michael said, finally looking up. "But now I'm not sure what that is." Mrs. Crawford opened her desk drawer and pulled out a blue notebook. It was nothing special, just a regular composition book from the school supply store. But she held it like it was important. "Michael, do you know what the most powerful tool in the world is?" she asked. Michael shrugged. "A basketball?" Mrs. Crawford laughed. "No, it's words. Words can tear people down or build them up. Words can change how we see ourselves and how we see the world." She handed him the notebook. "I want you to write down your goals in this. Write down how you feel when you're sad. Write down what you'll do to prove Coach Herring wrong." Michael took the notebook, confused. No teacher had ever shown such interest in him before. Most just cared about his grades, which were average at best. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. Mrs. Crawford smiled. "Because I grew up poor in rural North Carolina, too. I understand what it means to have a dream that seems impossible." She told Michael how she'd been the first in her family to finish high school, then college. How people said a black woman from the country had no business being a teacher. How she'd proven them all wrong. "Sometimes all we need is one person who believes in us," she said. "I believe in you, Michael Jordan." "You were that person for me," Michael told the elderly woman sitting across from him now. "You believed in me when no one else did." Mrs. Crawford smiled. "I saw something special in you. Not just athletic ability, but determination, fire." "I started writing in that notebook every night," Michael continued. "I wrote about practicing in my backyard until my mother called me in for dinner. About growing 2 inches that summer. About how I was going to make varsity next year, no matter what." "You certainly did," Mrs. Crawford said with pride. "I remember how Coach Herring's jaw dropped when you walked into tryouts junior year. You had grown so much, in height and in skill." Michael nodded. "I practiced every day, 6, 7 hours sometimes. My hands would be raw. My legs would shake. But I kept going, because I didn't want to let you down." "You never let me down, Michael." "Do you remember checking my notebook every week?" Michael asked. "You would correct my spelling and grammar, but never judge what I wrote." Mrs. Crawford laughed. "Your spelling was atrocious, but your passion jumped off the page." "You taught me new words to express how I felt," Michael said. "Words like perseverance, dedication, and resilient. I still use those words today when I talk to young players." He opened the notebook to a page where Mrs. Crawford had written in red pen along the margin, "Your determination is remarkable, Michael. Keep going." These notes kept me going on days when I wanted to quit. Michael said quietly, "When my arms ached from shooting basketballs for hours, when other students laughed at my dream of playing college basketball." Mrs. Crawford's eyes were wet again. "I had no idea my little notes meant so much." "They meant everything," Michael assured her. "You were the first person outside my family who really believed I could be great." He turned to another page where she had written, "Success isn't given. It's earned." "I've said that exact phrase in dozens of interviews," Michael admitted. "I never told anyone where I heard it first." Mrs. Crawford smiled. "I stole it from my own high school teacher." That's how education works. We pass on the best of what we learned. Michael thought about all the coaches, teammates, and mentors he'd had over his long career. None had made a bigger impact than this quiet English teacher who saw potential in a disappointed 15-year-old boy. "By junior year, I made the varsity team," Michael continued. "I'd grown to 6.3, and my skills had improved dramatically." "Was at your first game," Mrs. Crawford recalled. "You scored 35 points. I screamed myself hoarse, cheering for you." Michael grinned. "I remember seeing you in the stands. You were wearing a blue cardigan with a brooch shaped like a book." Mrs. Crawford's mouth fell open. "You remember what I was wearing?" "I remember everything about that day," Michael said. "It was the first time I thought maybe I could really be something special. And you were there to see it." He paused, looking down at his hands, the hands that had earned him millions of dollars, that had clutched championship trophies, that had signed countless autographs. "I went on to North Carolina, then the NBA," he said softly. "I won championships, gold medals, MVP awards, but I never forgot where it all started." Michael reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small package wrapped in blue paper. "I brought you something," he said, sliding it across the table. "It's not much compared to what you gave me, but I wanted you to have it." Mrs. Crawford carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a small gold basketball on a chain. Engraved on the back were the words, "To Mrs. Crawford, you gave me wings. Thank you. Michael Jordan." "Oh, Michael," she whispered, clutching the necklace to her heart. Michael smiled. "There's more. Much more. But first, I want you to tell me about your life. What happened after I graduated? Did you keep giving notebooks to other students?" Mrs. Crawford's eyes twinkled. "You weren't the only one who needed a little extra belief, Michael. There were many others after you." And as the morning sun streamed through the windows of the small conference room, Mrs. Crawford began to tell her own story. "I started teaching at Laney in 1960, Mrs. Crawford began, her voice taking on a rhythmic quality that reminded Michael of story time in her classroom. Back then, the school had just integrated. It wasn't easy being one of the only black teachers. Michael listened intently as Mrs. Crawford described her early teaching years, the challenges she faced, and the students whose lives she had touched. But he was especially curious about the notebooks. "Did you give notebooks to other students besides me?" he asked. Mrs. Crawford's eyes twinkled. "I did. Not to everyone. Only the ones who needed something special. Something just for them." She reached into her large purse and pulled out a small photo album. "These are some of my notebook kids." Michael flipped through the album, amazed. Each page held a photo of Mrs. Crawford with a former student, many holding blue notebooks identical to his. Teachers, doctors, business owners, artists, all smiling proudly next to their former English teacher. "How many?" Michael asked, overwhelmed by the volume of photos. 117 over 45 years of teaching, Mrs. Crawford said proudly. "And 23 more since I retired but kept volunteering. Each one had a different challenge to overcome." Michael shook his head in wonder. "And you kept in touch with all of them?" "Most of them," she nodded. "Not all became famous like you, Michael. But each one is special in their own way." Michael turned back to his worn blue notebook, running his fingers over the cover. "Would you like to see what I wrote in here?" Mrs. Crawford's eyes widened. "Only if you're comfortable sharing it." Those words were meant to be private. "I want you to see what your gift really meant to me," Michael insisted, opening the notebook to the first page. Young Michael sat on his bed, staring at the empty notebook Mrs. Crawford had given him that afternoon. He wasn't sure what to write. He'd never kept a journal before. Finally, he uncapped his pen and began. October 18th, 1978 today. Coach Herring cut me from varsity. I cried when I got home. Mom said it's okay to be sad, but Dad said use the pain to get better. Mrs. Crawford gave me this notebook to write down my goals and feelings. Here are my goals. Grow taller, at least 6 feet. 2. Practice basketball 2 extra hours every day. 3. Make varsity team next year. 4. Be the best player in school by senior year. 5. Get a college scholarship. 6. Make it to the NBA. Mom says number 6 is dreaming too big. Maybe she's right, but I'm writing it anyway. The next day, Michael brought the notebook to Mrs. Crawford as instructed. She read his entry, corrected a few spelling errors, and wrote at the bottom, "Dreams should be big, Michael. The bigger the dream, the harder. You'll work." Encouraged, Michael began writing in the notebook every night. He recorded his daily basketball practices, how many jump shots he made out of 100 attempts, the extra hours he spent shooting hoops in his backyard, until his mother Dolores called him in for dinner. November 3rd, 1978, practiced for 3 hours after school today. Larry beat me 11-9 in one-on-one, but it's the closest I've ever come to beating him. My jump shot is getting better. My hands hurt, and I've got a blister on my right thumb, but I don't care. I'm thinking about Coach Herring's face when he sees how good I am next year. Mrs. Crawford checked on the notebook once a week. She corrected his spelling and grammar, but never judged what he wrote. Instead, she taught him new words to express his feelings better. December 10th, 1978, Mrs. Crawford taught me a new word today. Perseverance. It means keeping going even when things are hard. She says, I have lots of perseverance because I practice, even when I'm tired or when other kids make fun of me for spending so much time on basketball. As the months passed, the notebook became Michael's closest confidant. He wrote about his frustrations and his small victories. He wrote about growing an inch taller over Christmas break. He wrote about watching college basketball games on TV and imagining himself playing for North Carolina someday. March 15, 1979 measured. Myself today. I'm 5'11" now. Dad says, I might keep growing. I hope so. Coach Herring likes tall players. I'm getting faster too. Race Jeff to the corner and back after school and beat him easy. Jump shot percentage up to 70 out of 100 from the free throw line. On really tough days, Mrs. Crawford left little notes in the margins of his notebook. Your determination is remarkable, Michael. Keep going. Success isn't given, it's earned. Your future is as big as your dreams. These words became Michael's fuel. When his arms ached from shooting basketballs for hours, he remembered Mrs. Crawford's belief in him. When other students laughed at his dream of playing college basketball, he read her notes again. August 29th, 1979, first day of school. I'm 6'2". Now! Saw Coach Herring in the hallway, and he did a double take. Tryouts are in 3 weeks. I'm ready. Mrs. Crawford says my writing is getting better too. She taught me the word inevitable today. It means something that's certain to happen. Making the team this year is inevitable if I keep working hard. By the time tryouts came around in September, Michael had grown to 6'3", and his skills had improved dramatically. He was faster, stronger, and more determined than any other player. At Laney High. When the varsity roster was posted, Michael's name was at the top. September 21st, 1979, I did it. Made the varsity team today. Coach Herring said he's never seen a player improve so much in 1 year. Mom cried when I told her. Dad just nodded and said he knew I could do it. First person I wanted to tell after my parents was Mrs. Crawford. She hugged me and said she was proud. That felt really good. Mrs. Crawford was at his first game, cheering loudly from the bleachers as Michael scored 35 points against Jacksonville High School. As his sophomore year turned into junior year, the notebook entries became less about proving Coach Herring wrong and more about Michael's growing ambitions. April 12th, 1980, College Scouts at the game today. Coach says UNC is interested. That's my dream school. Mrs. Crawford says my grades need to improve if I want a scholarship there. She's helping me with extra English work. I'm studying harder now. You actually improved your grades for me? Mrs. Crawford asked, looking up from the notebook with surprise. Michael laughed. Only for you. No other teacher could get me to care about schoolwork. But I knew how much it meant to you. He turned to entries from his senior year, when scholarship offers were pouring in and his future was taking shape. I can't believe you kept track of everything so carefully, Mrs. Crawford marveled, looking at entries where Michael had detailed his scoring statistics, workout routines, and goals for improvement. This notebook taught me the power of writing things down, Michael explained. When I got to the NBA, I still kept journals. Not as neat as this one, but the habit stayed with me. It helped me focus, set goals, process losses. Mrs. Crawford smiled proudly. That's exactly what I hoped it would do. Not just help you with basketball, but give you a tool for life. Michael carefully turned to the last page of the notebook. Before I graduated, you gave me a new notebook for college. Do you remember what you wrote inside the cover? Mrs. Crawford closed her eyes, thinking back. Something about champions, wasn't it? Michael nodded and recited from memory. Champions aren't made in the gyms. Champions are made from something deep inside. A desire, a dream, a vision. Stole that from Muhammad Ali, Mrs. Crawford admitted with a small smile. It doesn't matter where it came from, Michael said. Those words stayed with me through NCAA championships, Olympic gold medals, and 6 NBA titles with the Chicago Bulls. Through the death of my father, my brief baseball career, and everything after basketball. He closed the notebook gently. You gave me more than words, Mrs. Crawford. You gave me belief. And that's what I came here to thank you for today. Mrs. Crawford reached across the table and took Michael's hand. Her skin was thin and spotted, with age, but her grip was surprisingly strong. You did all the hard work, Michael, she said firmly. I just gave you a push in the right direction. Michael shook his head. You did so much more than that, and I'm finally in a position to return the favor. Mrs. Crawford looked confused. What do you mean? Michael smiled mysteriously. Let's just say the gold necklace isn't the only gift I brought today. But before I explain, I need to ask you something important. Mrs. Crawford raised an eyebrow. What's that? Will you come with me? Michael asked, standing and offering his hand. There's something I want to show you. Mrs. Crawford looked up at Michael, curiosity lighting her eyes. Where are we going? It's a surprise, Michael said with a smile. Do you trust me? Of course I do, she replied, taking his offered hand. Michael helped Mrs. Crawford to her feet. Despite her age, she moved with the dignity and grace that had always commanded respect. In her classroom, he carefully tucked the blue notebook into his jacket pocket and escorted her out of the conference room. As they walked through the library, students and staff stared in amazement. The librarian rushed forward with Mrs. Crawford's purse and sweater. You need anything else, Mrs. Crawford? She asked, shooting excited glances at Michael. No thank you, Nancy. I'm apparently going on an adventure with Mr. Jordan. Mrs. Crawford smiled. I should be back for tomorrow's reading group. Don't worry about a thing, Nancy assured her. Michael guided Mrs. Crawford through the school hallways, toward the exit. Word had spread quickly through the school, and students pressed against classroom doors and windows for a glimpse of the basketball legend. Teachers tried unsuccessfully to maintain order as excited whispers echoed down the corridors. You always did know how to cause a commotion, Mrs. Crawford chuckled. Not intentionally, Michael replied. At least, not this time. Outside, Keith jumped out of the SUV to open the doors when he saw them approaching. His eyebrows shot up in surprise at the sight of the elderly woman on Michael's arm, but he quickly composed his face. Mrs. Crawford, this is Keith, my driver and security. Michael introduced them. Keith, this is Mrs. Ruby Crawford, my English teacher from high school and one of the most important people in my life. It's an honor to meet you, ma'am, Keith said respectfully, helping her into the vehicle. Once they were all settled in the SUV, Michael said, Let's go to Oakdale Cemetery first, Keith. Mrs. Crawford gave Michael a questioning look, but he just smiled and patted her hand. As they drove through the familiar streets of Wilmington, Mrs. Crawford gazed out the window, pointing occasionally at buildings that had changed over the years. Do you remember that corner store? She asked, indicating a small brick building. You and Larry used to stop there for sodas after playing basketball. The owner, Mr. Peterson, came to all your high school games. Michael nodded. I remember. He always saved cherry Cokes for me because he knew they were my favorite. The SUV turned onto a quiet, tree-lined road leading to Oakdale Cemetery, one of the oldest in Wilmington. Established in 1852, its moss-draped oaks and historic monuments made it a peaceful resting place for generations of local families. "Why are we here, Michael?" Mrs. Crawford asked softly as Keith parked the car. "I want to visit someone," Michael replied, helping her out of the SUV. "Someone important to both of us." They walked slowly along the winding paths, Michael matching, his stride to Mrs. Crawford's careful steps. The spring air was warm, filled with the scent of blooming azaleas and freshly cut grass. Finally, they stopped before a well-maintained grave. The headstone read, "James R. Jordan Seater, 1936-1993, beloved husband, father, and friend." "Your father," Mrs. Crawford whispered, reaching out to touch the smooth stone. "Dad always said you were the best teacher I ever had," Michael said, standing tall beside her. "He came to every parent-teacher conference. Remember?" Mrs. Crawford nodded. "I do. He wore a tie even though he came straight from work at the General Electric plant. He always asked such thoughtful questions about your progress." Michael knelt and removed a fallen leaf from his father's grave. "Dad believed in me before anyone else did. Then, you became the second person." He stood up again and took a deep breath. "I wanted to come here today because this is where I made a promise that I never kept." Until now, Mrs. Crawford watched him curiously as Michael explained, "After Dad was killed in 1993, I came here often to talk to him. During one visit, I promised I would find a way to thank you properly for what you did for me. Not just a quick visit or a thank you note, but something meaningful that would honor the impact you had on my life." Michael's voice grew softer. "But I got busy with basketball, then business, then ownership of the Hornets. Years passed. I sent Christmas cards and made donations to Laney High in your name. But I never fulfilled my real promise." Mrs. Crawford shook her head. "Michael, you didn't need to." "I did," he interrupted gently. "I do. Dad would have wanted me to keep my word. So here I am, 30 years late, but finally ready to thank you properly." Mrs. Crawford blinked back tears. "What exactly did you have in mind?" "You'll see," Michael said with his famous competitive smile. "This is just the first stop today." They stood in comfortable silence for a few moments, paying respects to James Jordan Sr. Before leaving, Michael placed a small basketball charm at the base of the headstone. "He was so proud of you," Mrs. Crawford said as they walked back to the SUV. "Not just because of basketball, but because of the man you became." Michael nodded, emotion thick in his throat. "I wish he could have seen everything that happened after. The second three-peat with the Bulls, my kids growing up, the Hornets franchise." "He saw," Mrs. Crawford said with conviction. "Maybe not with his eyes, but he saw." Their next stop was unexpected. Laney High School's old gymnasium. Now used mainly for physical education classes and junior varsity games, it had been replaced by a newer, larger facility for varsity competitions. Michael led Mrs. Crawford through the side entrance that coaches and players had used decades ago. The familiar smell of floor polish and old wood brought back a flood of memories. "This is where it all began," Michael said, his voice echoing in the empty space. "Right here on this court." The gym looked smaller than he remembered. The wooden bleachers were worn, the championship banners faded. But it was still special. "Before graduating high school, I came here one last time," Michael explained, walking to center court. "It was the night before I left for Chapel Hill to start summer training at UNC. Mrs. Crawford followed him, her footsteps slow but steady. "I was so excited about going to North Carolina," Michael continued. "I had my scholarship, my future ahead of me. but I wanted to say goodbye to this place properly." He turned to face Mrs. Crawford. "You found me here that night. Do you remember?" Mrs. Crawford smiled. "I was returning some books to the library and saw the lights on in the gym. You were shooting free throws all by yourself." Michael nodded. 200 consecutive free throws. I wouldn't let myself leave until I made 200 in a row. "You were always so hard on yourself," Mrs. Crawford said, shaking her head. "You gave me a new notebook that night," Michael said. "A red one for college." Mrs. Crawford's eyes lit up with recognition. "I did. I had it special ordered from the university bookstore with the UNC logo. Inside the cover, you wrote, 'Champions aren't made in the gyms. Champions are made from something deep inside. A desire, a dream, a vision. And you promised that when you became successful, you'd come back and thank me properly." Mrs. Crawford finished for him. "I never expected you to keep that promise, Michael. You've had such an extraordinary life." Michael took her hands in his. "That's exactly why I needed to keep it. Because without you, that extraordinary life might never have happened." He led her to the bleachers, where they sat side by side looking out at the empty court. "What happened to that red notebook?" Mrs. Crawford asked. Michael smiled. "It's in a safe at my house, along with all my other important keepsakes. I filled every page during my years at North Carolina." "I wish I could read it," Mrs. Crawford said. "Maybe someday," Michael replied. "But first, we have one more stop to make, the most important one." He helped Mrs. Crawford to her feet again. As they walked toward the exit, Michael turned for one last look at the court where his legend began. "You know," Mrs. Crawford said thoughtfully, "the best thanks you ever gave me wasn't anything you said or did. It was what you became." Michael squeezed her hand gently. "Well, I'm about to thank you better than that. Much better." As they walked back to the SUV, Michael checked his watch. It was nearly noon. His plan was unfolding perfectly so far, but there was still much to do. "Where to next?" Mrs. Crawford asked, settling into the comfortable leather seat. Michael smiled mysteriously. "You'll see soon enough. Keith, let's head to Market Street." As they drove through downtown Wilmington, Mrs. Crawford pointed out changes to the historic district. New restaurants and shops had replaced some of the old establishments, but the charming character of the port city remained. "The city has grown so much since you left," she told Michael, "but it still has that special feeling, doesn't it?" Michael nodded. "That's why I still keep a home here. No matter where I've lived, Chicago, Charlotte, Florida, Wilmington will always be home." Keith pulled up in front of an elegant restaurant called Caprice Bistro. The French restaurant was housed in a beautifully restored historic building with large windows and a charming awning. "Lunchtime," Michael announced, helping Mrs. Crawford out of the vehicle. "I've reserved the private dining room upstairs." The restaurant owner himself greeted them at the door, barely containing his excitement at having such a famous guest. "Mr. Jordan, Mrs. Crawford, welcome. Everything is ready upstairs." As they climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor, Michael kept a supportive hand on Mrs. Crawford's elbow. The private dining room was intimate and elegant, with a table set for two by a window overlooking the Cape Fear River. "This is lovely, Michael," Mrs. Crawford said, as a waiter held her chair. "But you still haven't told me what this big thank you is all about." Michael sat across from her. "Patience was never your strongest virtue, Mrs. Crawford," he teased. "I remember you pacing the classroom when we took too long with our quizzes," she laughed. "Some things never change." After they ordered French onion soup and salmon for Mrs. Crawford, steak for Michael, he pulled out his phone. While we wait for our food, there's something I need to check, he said, typing quickly. His expression grew concerned as he read something on the screen. Is everything all right? Mrs. Crawford asked. Michael looked up. I'm not sure. I was supposed to meet with someone important after lunch, but they're not responding to my messages. He pressed a button on his phone. Keith, can you make some calls about our next appointment? I'm not getting any response. While Keith worked on solving the mystery, Michael and Mrs. Crawford enjoyed their lunch. They reminisced about the old days at Laney High, catching up on what had happened to various teachers and students from that era. Do you remember Principal Watson? Mrs. Crawford asked. He retired to Florida but still calls me every Christmas. He was terrified of me, Michael laughed. Not because I was a troublemaker, but because he was sure I'd break an arm or leg playing basketball and the school would be liable. Their dessert, chocolate mousse for Mrs. Crawford and creme brulee for Michael, had just arrived when Keith appeared at the door of the private dining room. His expression was serious. Mr. Jordan, could I speak with you for a moment? He asked. Michael excused himself and stepped into the hallway with Keith. When he returned a few minutes later, his face was grim. What's wrong? Mrs. Crawford asked. Immediately. Michael sat down heavily. There's been a change of plans. The person I wanted you to meet this afternoon, they're in the hospital. Mrs. Crawford's hand flew to her heart. Oh my! Is it someone I know? Yes, Michael said quietly. It's Rachel Thompson. Mrs. Crawford gasped. Little Rachel? From my class of '95? Michael nodded. Not so little anymore. She's 48 now and the director of the Wilmington Literacy Council. She was going to help me present your surprise. What happened to her? Car accident last night, Michael explained. She's stable, but has a broken leg and concussion. They're keeping her for observation at New Hanover Regional Medical Center. Mrs. Crawford pushed her dessert aside. We should visit her. That's exactly what I was thinking, Michael agreed. He signaled for the check. There's been a change to our surprise, but maybe it's for the better. Everything happens for a reason. 20 minutes later, they arrived at New Hanover Regional Medical Center, the largest hospital in the area. Michael had called ahead, and the hospital administrator was waiting to escort them personally. Ms. Thompson is on the 3rd floor, the administrator said, leading them to a private elevator. She's awake and will be thrilled to see you both. As they walked through the hospital corridors, Michael noticed Mrs. Crawford slowing down, her breath coming a little heavier. Are you all right? He asked with concern. Just these old bones, she assured him with a smile. Don't heal as quick as they used to. The administrator showed them to room 317, where Rachel Thompson was propped up in bed, her right leg in a cast. Her face lit up when she saw her visitors. Mrs. Crawford! Michael Jordan! Oh my goodness! She tried to sit up straighter, wincing at the movement. Careful now, Mrs. Crawford said, moving quickly to her bedside. No need to hurt yourself more. Rachel looked embarrassed. I'm so sorry about today, Mr. Jordan. I know how important this was supposed to be. Don't worry about it, Michael reassured her. The plans have changed, but the surprise is still happening. Just a little differently now. Mrs. Crawford looked back and forth between them. Would someone please tell me what this surprise is? Before either could answer, a doctor appeared in the doorway. Excuse me, but I need to check on Ms. Thompson. He stopped short when he recognized Michael. Oh, Mr. Jordan. I'm Dr. Bennett. It's an honor to meet you. After they shook hands, Dr. Bennett turned his attention to Mrs. Crawford. He studied her with a professional eye. Ma'am, are you feeling all right? You look a bit pale. I'm fine, Mrs. Crawford insisted. Just a long day of excitement. Dr. Bennett wasn't convinced. Would you mind if I checked your pulse? Mrs. Crawford reluctantly agreed. After taking her pulse and blood pressure. The doctor frowned. Your blood pressure is quite elevated, and your heart rate is faster than I'd like. How long have you been on your feet today? We've been out for a few hours, Michael admitted, looking concerned. I think you should sit down and rest, Dr. Bennett advised Mrs. Crawford. Perhaps in the waiting area, while I examine Ms. Thompson. Michael helped Mrs. Crawford to a comfortable chair in the waiting room. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't think about how tiring this day might be for you. Nonsense. Mrs. Crawford waved away his concern. I'm having a wonderful time. Just need to catch my breath a bit. While they waited, Michael stepped away to make some phone calls. Mrs. Crawford could hear snippets of his conversation. Something about changed plans and moving everything to tomorrow. When he returned, his expression was serious. I think we should get you home to rest. We can continue our adventure tomorrow when you're feeling stronger. Mrs. Crawford started to protest, but stopped when she saw the worry in Michael's eyes. Perhaps you're right, she conceded. These old bones aren't what they used to be. Michael helped her to her feet. Keith will take you home, and I'll meet you there in a bit. I just need to finish some arrangements for tomorrow. As they walked slowly toward the elevator, Mrs. Crawford suddenly stopped. Michael, look, she said, pointing to a sign on the wall, Pediatric Oncology Unit. Michael followed, her gaze. What about it? When I was still teaching, I used to volunteer there, reading to the children, Mrs. Crawford explained. I wonder if they still need readers. Before Michael could respond, a nurse approached them. Mrs. Crawford. Ruby Crawford. Mrs. Crawford turned in surprise. Yes? The nurse smiled broadly. I thought that was you. I'm Susan Matthews. You probably don't remember me, but you gave me a purple notebook in 1992. I was struggling with science, and you helped me study. Now I'm the head nurse of this unit. Mrs. Crawford's eyes widened in recognition. Susan, of course I remember you. You wanted to be a nurse since 3rd grade. Susan nodded excitedly. And here I am. I can't believe you're here. The children would love to meet you. Some of them have been asking for new stories just today. Mrs. Crawford looked at Michael with a question in her eyes. Go ahead, he encouraged her. I can see you want to. Just for a few minutes, Mrs. Crawford agreed. I'd love to meet the children. As Susan led Mrs. Crawford toward the children's ward, Michael pulled out his phone again. This unexpected detour had given him an idea, one that would make his surprise even more special. Change of plans, he told the person on the other end of the line. I need everything moved to New Hanover Medical Center. Yes, the whole thing. And I need it ready by tomorrow afternoon. He smiled as he watched Mrs. Crawford disappear down the hallway, her steps somehow more energetic now that she was heading toward children who needed her. Some things never changed. Michael followed the sound of Mrs. Crawford's voice down the hospital corridor. He found her in a brightly colored room filled with children in pajamas and hospital gowns. Some sat in wheelchairs, others in regular chairs, and a few were in hospital beds that had been wheeled in for the impromptu story time. Mrs. Crawford sat in a rocking chair, reading from a picture book about a basketball-playing giraffe. Her voice changed for each character, bringing the story to life. The children were captivated, their medical challenges temporarily forgotten as they giggled at the tale. Michael stood quietly in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. Nurse Susan noticed him and whispered, "She hasn't lost her touch. Some of these kids haven't smiled in days." When Mrs. Crawford finished the story, a little girl with no hair and a feeding tube asked, "Can you read another one, please?" "I think that's enough for today, Lily," Nurse Susan said gently. "Mrs. Crawford needs to rest." That's when one of the older children spotted Michael. "Is that Michael Jordan?" he gasped, his eyes wide with disbelief. All heads turned toward the doorway. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then the room erupted in excited chatter. "It really is him! Michael Jordan! Mom's never going to believe this." Michael stepped into the room, smiling. "Hi, everyone. I see you've met my favorite teacher, Mrs. Crawford." "You were her student?" a boy with a cast on both legs asked in amazement. Michael nodded. "A long time ago. And she changed my life." Mrs. Crawford beamed at him. "Michael was always special, even before he became famous." "Did you know he was going to be a basketball star?" asked another child. "I knew he had determination like I'd never seen before," Mrs. Crawford replied. "And that can take you anywhere you want to go." For the next 30 minutes, Michael and Mrs. Crawford answered questions from the children. Michael signed autographs on hospital gowns, casts, and even a few medical charts, with Nurse Susan's permission. Mrs. Crawford told stories about young Michael in high school, carefully omitting the ones that might diminish the legend sitting beside her. When it was finally time to leave, Nurse Susan walked them back to the elevator. "This meant the world to them," she said sincerely. "Some of these children are facing very difficult treatments. Today will give them something positive to hold on to." "I'd like to come back," Mrs. Crawford said. "Perhaps regularly, if that would be allowed." "Of course," Susan exclaimed. "We'd love to have you any time." Michael pressed the elevator button. "Mrs. Crawford, I should get you home now. It's been a long day." Mrs. Crawford didn't argue this time. The visit with the children had been rewarding but tiring. "Yes, I think that would be wise. But I'll see Rachel before we go." They returned to Rachel Thompson's room to say goodbye. Rachel looked disappointed. "So the big surprise is postponed?" Michael nodded. "Until tomorrow. But it'll be even better now. I've got some new ideas." "What surprise?" Mrs. Crawford asked again, hands on her hips in mock frustration. Michael and Rachel exchanged smiles. "You'll have to wait until tomorrow," Michael teased. "Good things come to those who wait." Keith drove them to Mrs. Crawford's house, a modest, one-story home on a quiet street lined with oak trees. The house was small but well-maintained, with a neat garden of roses and azaleas in the front yard. "You've kept the place looking nice," Michael commented as he helped Mrs. Crawford up the front walk. "My neighbor's grandson mows the lawn, and I still do my own gardening," she said proudly. "Keeps these old bones moving." Inside, the house was just as Michael had imagined it would be. Walls lined with bookshelves, comfortable furniture that prioritized function over fashion, and photos everywhere. Many of the photos were of former students, including several of Michael throughout his career. "Would you like some tea?" Mrs. Crawford offered, heading toward the kitchen. "You sit," Michael insisted. "I'll make it. Just point me in the right direction." As Michael prepared tea, Mrs. Crawford settled into her favorite armchair and kicked off her shoes with a sigh of relief. "What a day this has been," she said. "When I woke up this morning, I never imagined I'd be spending the day with Michael Jordan." Michael brought 2 cups of tea to the living room. "And I never imagined I'd finally be fulfilling a promise I made decades ago." He sat across from her, looking thoughtful. "Seeing you with those children today, it reminded me of how you were with us in school. Always patient, always encouraging. You had that same look in your eyes." Mrs. Crawford smiled. "Teaching isn't just about transferring knowledge. It's about seeing potential and nurturing it." "You saw something in me that no one else did," Michael said quietly. "Not even me." "I saw determination," Mrs. Crawford replied. "And heart. Those are rare qualities, Michael." Talent is common, but the drive to develop that talent to its fullest potential? That's special. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, sipping their tea. Then Michael's phone buzzed with a message. He read it and smiled. "Everything's set for tomorrow," he announced. "Are you up for another adventure?" Mrs. Crawford nodded. "As long as I get my full 8 hours of sleep tonight, I'll be ready for anything." "Good. I'll pick you up at 10, Michael said, standing. To leave. "And Mrs. Crawford?" "Wear something nice. We're going to be taking pictures." After Michael left, Mrs. Crawford sat looking at the blue notebook he had forgotten on her coffee table. She picked it up carefully, running her fingers over the worn cover. 47 years of memories were contained in those pages. She had given out 140 notebooks over her career, but only one had found its way back to her like this. Only one had traveled through championships and heartbreaks, victories and defeats, only to return with its owner to say thank you. The next morning, Keith arrived promptly at 10 to pick up Mrs. Crawford. Michael wasn't with him. "Mr. Jordan will meet us at the hospital," Keith explained as he helped her into the SUV. "He's been there since dawn, getting everything ready." When they arrived at New Hanover Regional Medical Center, Keith escorted Mrs. Crawford to a conference room on the first floor. The large room had been transformed, decorated with blue and white balloons, Laney High's colors, flowers, and a banner that read, "Thank you, Mrs. Crawford." Michael was directing the placement of chairs when Mrs. Crawford walked in. He turned, and his face broke into a huge smile. "You look beautiful," he said, taking in her powder blue dress and the gold basketball necklace he had given her. "What is all this?" Mrs. Crawford asked, looking around in amazement. "This," Michael said proudly, "is your long overdue thank you." He led her to a comfortable chair in the center of the room. "Just wait here for a few minutes. Our guests will be arriving soon." "Guests? What guests?" Michael just smiled mysteriously and walked away to speak with a woman setting up a video camera in the corner of the room. Mrs. Crawford sat patiently, watching the room fill with hospital staff and patients who could walk or be wheeled in. Rachel Thompson arrived, her leg in a cast, but her face glowing with excitement. She wheeled herself over to Mrs. Crawford. "Are you ready for the surprise?" Rachel asked. "I still don't know what it is," Mrs. Crawford admitted. Rachel smiled. "You'll find out in about 1 minute. Look, here they come." Mrs. Crawford turned toward the door. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. People were filing into the room, dozens of them, of all ages. Some were in their 50s and 60s, others in their 20s or 30s. A few were even teenagers, and each person carried a notebook. Blue, green, red, purple, yellow. Notebooks of every color, but all the same size and style. "My notebook, kids," Mrs. Crawford whispered as tears filled her eyes. "But how?" Before Rachel could answer, Michael stepped to the front of the room, holding a microphone. "Mrs. Crawford," he began, his deep voice filled with emotion, "I promise to thank you properly someday. Today is that day." "Mrs. Crawford," Michael continued, 47 years ago, you gave me a blue notebook and told me to write down my dreams. You believed in me when no one else did. That notebook changed my life." He gestured to the crowd filling the conference room. "But as I discovered yesterday, I wasn't the only one. You changed many lives with your notebooks and your belief." Mrs. Crawford sat speechless, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the faces of former students, now adults with lives and families of their own, all holding their treasured notebooks. "When I decided to come thank you," Michael explained, "I reached out to Rachel Thompson, who helped me track down as many of your notebook kids as possible. We found 93 of them. 78 are here today. A man in his 50s stepped forward. I'm Dr. James Wilson now, but I was just Jimmy, who couldn't pass science when you gave me this green notebook in 1982. He held up a worn green composition book. Now I'm chief of surgery at Duke University Hospital. Your words kept me going through medical school when I wanted to quit. A middle-aged woman in a police uniform spoke next. Sergeant Tanya Roberts, Wilmington Police Department. You gave me this purple notebook when I was failing algebra and my home life was falling apart. You wrote that I was stronger than I knew. I still read those words before every shift. One by one, former students came forward. Teachers, business owners, engineers, artists, and parents, each sharing how Mrs. Crawford's notebook and encouragement had changed their trajectory. Some had overcome learning disabilities, others poverty or family problems. All credited Mrs. Crawford with seeing potential in them that others had missed. This is wonderful, Mrs. Crawford managed to say through her tears. So wonderful to see you all grown up and doing such amazing things. When the last student had spoken, Michael took the microphone again. This reunion is just the beginning of my thank you, Mrs. Crawford. The real surprise is what comes next. He nodded to Rachel, who wheeled herself forward with a folder. Michael's foundation is creating the Ruby Crawford Scholarship, she announced. It will provide full college tuition for Laney High students who show exceptional character and determination, especially those facing significant challenges. Michael added, the scholarship will fund 20 students per year, forever. That's how long your impact will last, forever. The room erupted in applause. Mrs. Crawford covered her mouth with her hands, overwhelmed by the announcement. But Michael wasn't finished. There's more, he said, signaling to Keith, who brought in a large presentation board covered with a cloth. While talking with your notebook, kids, I learned something remarkable, Michael explained. 17 of them are now working right here at New Hanover Regional Medical Center. Doctors, nurses, administrators, and technicians. He pulled away the cloth to reveal architectural renderings of a beautiful new building. So I'm funding the construction of a new pediatric wing at this hospital. It will be called the Ruby Crawford Children's Center. More applause filled the room. Hospital administrators in the back were wiping away tears, having kept this secret for weeks during planning. The new center will include a special literacy program, Michael continued, where volunteers will read to children during their hospital stays, and the waiting rooms will be filled with notebooks, all colors, all sizes, for children who need a place to write down their thoughts and dreams during difficult times. Mrs. Crawford stood on shaky legs and embraced Michael, too emotional to speak. He held her gently, the basketball legend and the retired English teacher connected by something more powerful than fame or fortune. The simple act of believing in someone's potential. When Mrs. Crawford finally found her voice, she addressed the room. I don't deserve all this, she said humbly. I was just doing my job, the best way I knew how. You did more than a job, Michael countered. You changed lives. You changed my life. And mine, added Dr. Wilson. And mine, echoed Sergeant Roberts. More voices joined in until the room resonated with the chorus of lives transformed by one dedicated teacher. After the emotional reunion, Michael invited Mrs. Crawford and several of her former students to lunch in the hospital cafeteria, which had been transformed with tablecloths and decorations for the occasion. As they ate, the conversation flowed freely, decades melting away as former students reconnected with their beloved teacher. During a quiet moment, Mrs. Crawford leaned close to Michael. This is more than I ever could have imagined, she said, softly. But there's something I don't understand. Why did you bring everything here to the hospital? Rachel mentioned there were other plans originally. Michael explained how yesterday's unexpected hospital visit had changed everything. Seeing you with those children in the oncology ward, I realized this was the perfect place for your legacy. To continue, this is where your compassion and belief in others can keep making a difference. Mrs. Crawford nodded thoughtfully. It does seem right, doesn't it? So many of my former students working here already. Exactly, Michael agreed. And the new Children's Center will reach thousands of kids for generations to come. Your impact will never end. After lunch, Michael arranged for photographers to take pictures of Mrs. Crawford with her notebook kids. Group photos, individual portraits, and candid shots captured the joy of the reunion. Michael promised copies for everyone. These will be part of a special book we're creating, he told Mrs. Crawford. The Notebook Legacy: How Ruby Crawford Changed Wilmington one Student at a Time. Mrs. Crawford laughed. Now you're being ridiculous, Michael. No, I'm not, he said seriously. Your story deserves to be told. Your method was simple but profound, giving students a private place to express themselves and then responding with encouragement instead of judgment. That's something other teachers should learn. Throughout the afternoon, more surprises were revealed. Michael had arranged for Mrs. Crawford's house to be completely renovated while she was away. New roof, heating system, accessible bathroom, and kitchen. The work would begin tomorrow, and she would stay in a comfortable suite at Wilmington's best hotel during the renovations. Michael, this is too much, she protested. It's not enough, he insisted. Do you know how many millions of dollars I've made because of the confidence you gave me? This is just a small fraction of what I owe you. Then came the announcement that truly left Mrs. Crawford speechless. Michael revealed his foundation had established a teacher training program at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, focused on methods for reaching struggling students. It would be called the Ruby Crawford Center for Educational Excellence. We'll be bringing teachers from across the country to learn how to do what you did naturally, Michael explained. How to see potential instead of problems, how to nurture determination, how to change lives one student at a time. Mrs. Crawford shook her head in amazement. I never had any formal method, Michael. I just tried to see each student as an individual with their own stories and struggles. And that's exactly what we want to teach others to do, Michael said firmly. As the celebration continued, Mrs. Crawford found quiet moments to connect with each of her former students. She remembered specific details about their time in her classroom, struggles they had overcome, goals they had set, progress they had made. Her remarkable memory touched each person deeply. How do you remember so much about each of us? Dr. Wilson asked in amazement. You must have taught thousands of students over your career. Mrs. Crawford smiled. When you truly care about someone, you remember what matters to them. It's as simple as that. Later in the afternoon, Michael pulled Mrs. Crawford aside. There's one more surprise, he said. But this one is just for you, not for the crowd. He handed her a small blue box, different from the one that had contained the gold basketball necklace. Inside was a key. What's this? She asked. The key to a new literacy center we're building. Downtown, Michael explained. The Ruby Crawford Literacy Center will provide free tutoring and reading materials for children and adults struggling with reading. It will be just 4 blocks from Laney High, in that empty building on Market Street. Mrs. Crawford fingered the key thoughtfully. Another building with my name on it. You're going to make me terribly vain, Michael. He laughed. Impossible. You're the most humble person I know. And what am I supposed to do with this literacy center? she asked, though her eyes already showed understanding. "Run it," Michael said simply. "If you want to. The center needs a director who understands what it's like to change lives through words." Mrs. Crawford was quiet for a long moment. At 83, she had thought her teaching days were largely behind her, limited to volunteering a few hours a week at the school library. Now Michael was offering her a chance to make an even bigger impact. "I'd need help," she said finally. "These old bones can't work 40-hour weeks anymore." "You'll have a full staff," Michael assured her. "You'll be the heart and wisdom of the place, the inspiration. Others will handle the day-to-day operations." "Then yes," Mrs. Crawford decided, her eyes bright with new purpose. "I would be honored to direct the center." Michael grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that, because there's one more part to this surprise." Mrs. Crawford raised an eyebrow. "Michael? Jordan, how many one more surprises do you have planned?" "This is the last one." "For real," he promised. "But it's the biggest one of all." Mrs. Crawford sighed with mock exasperation. "Well, what is it?" Michael's smile widened. "You'll have to wait until tomorrow to find out." That evening, Mrs. Crawford checked into the elegant suite Michael had arranged at the Wilmington Riverfront Hotel. The spacious rooms overlooked the Cape Fear River, with a balcony offering stunning views of the sunset. Fresh flowers filled the sitting room, and a basket of her favorite books waited on the coffee table. "Michael thinks of everything," she murmured, settling into a comfortable armchair with a sigh. The day had been emotional and overwhelming. Wonderful, but exhausting. A knock on the door announced room service. A light dinner she hadn't ordered, with a note from Michael. "Rest well. Tomorrow's another big day. MJ." After eating, Mrs. Crawford took a long, hot bath in the luxurious bathroom, then called her niece in Atlanta to share the incredible events of the past 2 days. Her niece was skeptical until Mrs. Crawford sent photos from her new phone, another gift from Michael, who had insisted she needed to join the 21st century. "It's really him, Auntie Ruby," her niece exclaimed when she saw the pictures. "Michael Jordan! I can't believe it." "He was always special," Mrs. Crawford said, simply. "Not just because of basketball, but because of his heart." As she prepared for bed, Mrs. Crawford felt a familiar ache in her hip, the one that had been bothering her for months, but she'd been too stubborn to have checked. Today's excitement had aggravated it, sending sharp pains down her leg. "Just old age," she told herself, swallowing an aspirin before climbing into the king-sized bed. Nothing to worry about. But in the morning, the pain was worse. She could barely walk to the bathroom. When Michael called to check on her, she couldn't hide the strain in her voice. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. "Just a bit of hip pain," she admitted. "Nothing serious." "I'm sending a doctor to your room," Michael said firmly. No arguments. 20 minutes later, a kind-faced woman arrived at her door. "Dr. Lisa Chen," she introduced herself. "I'm an orthopedic specialist at New Hanover. Mr. Jordan asked me to check on you." After a thorough examination, Dr. Chen looked concerned. "Mrs. Crawford, how long have you been having this pain?" "A few months," she confessed. "It comes and goes." "I think you need an X-ray," Dr. Chen said. "From what I can tell, this could be more than just arthritis. Would you allow me to arrange—" "That for you?" Mrs. Crawford hesitated. She hated hospitals when she was the patient, rather than the visitor. But she also knew Michael wouldn't proceed with his plans if she wasn't well. "All right," she agreed reluctantly. "But please tell Michael not to worry. I'm sure it's nothing serious." Dr. Chen smiled kindly. "I'll let him know. And don't worry, we'll take good care of you." An hour later, Mrs. Crawford was back at New Hanover Regional Medical Center, this time as a patient. X-rays confirmed Dr. Chen's suspicions. Mrs. Crawford had a hairline fracture in her hip that had been gradually worsening over time. "You need surgery," Dr. Chen explained gently. "The fracture won't heal properly on its own, and it could become a complete break if you fall." Mrs. Crawford's heart sank. Surgery at her age was risky, and the recovery would be long and difficult. But before she could respond, Michael appeared in the doorway of the examination room. "I heard," he said, his face serious. "What do we need to do, Dr. Chen?" Dr. Chen explained the procedure. A relatively simple surgery to stabilize the fracture with pins, followed by several weeks of rehabilitation. "When can you do it?" Michael asked. "We can schedule it for tomorrow morning," Dr. Chen replied. "The sooner the better." Mrs. Crawford looked distressed. "But what about your big surprise, Michael? All your plans?" Michael sat beside her and took her hand. "The plans can wait. Your health is what matters now." "I feel terrible," Mrs. Crawford said, blinking back tears. "You've gone to so much trouble." "Hey now," Michael said softly. "Didn't you teach me that obstacles are just opportunities in disguise? This is just a detour, not a dead end." Mrs. Crawford had to smile at hearing her own words repeated back to her. "I see you were paying attention in class after all." Michael grinned. "Some lessons stick with you forever." The surgery was scheduled for 8:00 a.m. the next day. Dr. Chen assembled a team of the hospital's best orthopedic specialists, many of whom had been Mrs. Crawford's students years ago, and were honored to care for their former teacher. Michael stayed with Mrs. Crawford until she was wheeled into the operating room, holding her hand and telling stories about his basketball days to keep her mind off the surgery. "I'll be right here when you wake up," he promised. True to his word, Michael was beside her bed in the recovery room when Mrs. Crawford opened her eyes 3 hours later. The surgery had gone perfectly, Dr. Chen reported. With proper rehabilitation, Mrs. Crawford would regain full mobility. "How do you feel?" Michael asked as she became fully conscious. "Like I've been tackled by Shaquille O'Neal," Mrs. Crawford mumbled, still groggy from anesthesia. Michael laughed. "That's a pretty accurate description of hip surgery." Over the next few days, Mrs. Crawford remained in the hospital, beginning the first stages of her recovery. Michael visited every day, sometimes bringing special guests, her former students, colleagues from Laney High, even some of the children from the oncology ward who wanted to read to her for a change. News of Mrs. Crawford's surgery and Michael's presence at the hospital spread quickly through Wilmington. Soon, cards and flowers began arriving from current and former students, some from as far back as her first years of teaching in the 1960s. "I had no idea so many people remembered me," Mrs. Crawford said, amazed at the outpouring of love and well wishes. "You're not easy to forget," Michael assured her. A week after surgery, Mrs. Crawford was ready to begin more intensive physical therapy. She was determined to recover quickly, but the process was painful and frustrating for someone who had always been independent. During one particularly difficult therapy session, when she was struggling to take even a few steps with her walker, Michael arrived to find her in tears. "I can't do this," she said, uncharacteristically defeated. "It hurts too much." Michael wheeled a chair next to her and sat down. "Do you remember what you wrote in my notebook when I wanted to quit after my first varsity game? I scored only 2 points, and the crowd booed me," Mrs. Crawford thought back. "I wrote that pain is temporary, but quitting lasts forever." "Exactly," Michael nodded. "You also said the strongest people aren't those who never fall, but those who get back up every time they do." Mrs. Crawford took a deep breath. Using my own words against me. That's fighting dirty, Mr. Jordan. I learned from the best, Mrs. Crawford, he replied with a grin. Now, let's take 5 more steps before we call it a day. With Michael's encouragement, Mrs. Crawford not only took 5 more steps, but managed 10. Each day after that, her progress improved. The physical therapists were amazed at her determination. She's tough as nails, one of them told Michael. Most patients her age take months to make the progress she's making in weeks. She's always been like that, Michael said proudly. That's why she was able to handle students like me. 3 weeks. After surgery, Mrs. Crawford was well enough to be discharged. But there was a problem. Her house was still under renovation, and the hotel wasn't ideal for someone recovering from hip surgery. I've got that covered, Michael assured her. Keith will take us there now. When the SUV pulled up in front of a beautiful single-story home near the river, Mrs. Crawford looked confused. Where are we? Your temporary home, Michael explained, helping her from the vehicle. I've rented it for the next 2 months while you recover, and your house is being renovated. Inside, the house had been specially prepared for her recovery, with grab bars in the bathroom, a hospital bed in the bedroom if stairs were too difficult, and wide doorways to accommodate her walker. Michael, this is too much, Mrs. Crawford protested. Nothing is too much for you, he replied firmly. Not after all you've done for me, for all of us. As he helped her settle into a comfortable chair overlooking the garden, Michael added casually, By the way, your surprise is still happening, just delayed a bit until you're stronger. Mrs. Crawford raised an eyebrow. You're still not going to tell me what it is? Nope, Michael said with a mischievous smile. But trust me, it'll be worth the wait. 3 months passed. Summer turned to fall, painting Wilmington in shades of gold and crimson. Mrs. Crawford's recovery progressed steadily. From walker to cane to walking unassisted, she tackled each milestone with determination that impressed her doctors. Meanwhile, Michael's promised surprises were taking shape throughout the city. Construction began on the Ruby Crawford Children's Center at the hospital. Renovations to her home were completed, with improvements that would make her life easier without sacrificing the character of the place she'd lived for 5 decades. The Ruby Crawford Literacy Center was ahead of schedule. Its downtown location, transformed from an empty storefront to a welcoming space filled with books, comfortable reading nooks, and tutoring rooms. Michael sent photos of the progress, but insisted Mrs. Crawford wait to visit until she was fully recovered. When basketball season began at Laney High School, Michael called with news. They're planning a special ceremony, he explained. The school wants to honor both of us by naming the gymnasium after me and the library after you. Mrs. Crawford was speechless. The library? After me? The Ruby Crawford Learning Center, Michael confirmed. It's perfect, don't you think? The ceremony is next Friday evening. Do you feel up to attending? Wild horses couldn't keep me away, Mrs. Crawford assured him. The night of the ceremony arrived. Mrs. Crawford wore a new dress, royal blue with a modest neckline, and the gold basketball necklace Michael had given her. Keith arrived in the SUV to drive her to the school. You look wonderful, he said, helping her into the vehicle. How's the hip? Much better, Mrs. Crawford replied. Still a bit stiff in the mornings, but Dr. Chen says that's to be expected. When they arrived at Laney High, the parking lot was full. Students directed traffic, wearing special T-shirts with Crawford Jordan Legacy Night printed across the front. Goodness, Mrs. Crawford murmured. I wasn't expecting such a crowd. The school gymnasium was transformed. Banners hung from the ceilings celebrating Michael's basketball achievements. Photos from his high school days lined the walls. A stage had been set up at one end of the court, with chairs for dignitaries and special guests. Michael was waiting by the side entrance, dressed in an elegant suit. "Mrs. Crawford," he said warmly, taking her hands. "You look amazing. How do you feel?" "Nervous," she admitted. "I've never liked being the center of attention." Michael laughed. "That makes one of us. But tonight isn't about showing off. It's about inspiration. Showing these kids what's possible." He escorted her to the stage, where the principal, superintendent, mayor, and other local officials were already seated. The bleachers were packed with students, parents, teachers, and community members. Many faces were familiar, former students, who had come to honor their teacher. At precisely 7:20 p.m., the ceremony began. The principal welcomed everyone and explained the purpose of the evening: to celebrate two of Laney High's most distinguished alumni and their contributions to the school and community. First came the dedication of the Michael Jordan Gymnasium. The mayor spoke about Michael's athletic achievements, his business success, and his philanthropic work. A new sign was unveiled above the gym doors, featuring Michael's name and jersey number. Then it was time for the library dedication. The superintendent spoke about Mrs. Crawford's 45 years of teaching, her innovative methods, and the countless lives she had touched. Mrs. Crawford didn't just teach English, he said. She taught students to believe in themselves, to see possibilities where others saw limitations, to express their thoughts and feelings in words when they couldn't find their voice. A video played on a large screen, showing interviews with former students sharing how Mrs. Crawford had influenced their lives. The final interview was with Michael. "Mrs. Crawford saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself," he said on screen. "She gave me words to express my determination and confidence to pursue my dreams. Without her, there might not be 6 NBA championships or Air Jordan shoes or any of the success I've achieved. She was the catalyst that started it all." When the video ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the gymnasium. Mrs. Crawford was overwhelmed, dabbing at her tears with a handkerchief. The principal invited her to the podium. Leaning slightly on her cane, Mrs. Crawford addressed the crowd. "I'm just a simple English teacher who loved her students," she said, her voice strong despite her emotion. "I believed then, and I believe now, that every child has potential. Some just need a little more encouragement to find it." She turned to look at Michael. "I'm honored beyond words by this recognition. But the truth is, teachers plant seeds. We rarely get to see the full forest that grows from them. I've been blessed to witness what grew from the seeds planted in Michael Jordan's heart. And now he's planting new seeds of opportunity for future generations through his generosity. That's the greatest legacy any teacher could hope for." Shutki teaser. Crowd rose in a standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. When everyone was seated again, the principal announced that 20 students had been selected as the first recipients of the Ruby Crawford Scholarship. One by one, they came forward. Students who had overcome significant challenges through determination and hard work. Each scholarship recipient received a certificate and a blue notebook with a personal note from Mrs. Crawford inside. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone familiar with the story. After the ceremony, there was a reception in the newly renamed Ruby Crawford Learning Center. The library had been renovated with new books, computers, and comfortable reading areas. A portrait of Mrs. Crawford hung near the entrance, alongside a display case containing one of Michael's high school jerseys and a replica of the blue notebook that had started it all. Students and parents lined up to meet Michael and Mrs. Crawford, asking for autographs and photos. Michael noticed that Mrs. Crawford was becoming tired from standing so long. "Let's find you a quiet place to sit for a bit," he suggested, guiding her to a private office off the main library. Once they were alone, Michael checked his watch. "Are you up for one more stop tonight? There's something I want to show you." Mrs. Crawford tilted her head curiously. "Is this finally the big surprise you've been so mysterious about?" "Part of it," Michael admitted. "The rest will happen tomorrow. But this part is special, and the timing has to be tonight." Despite her fatigue, Mrs. Crawford was intrigued. "I'm game if you are." Michael helped her back to the SUV, where Keith was waiting. "Take us to the Literacy Center," he instructed. As they drove through downtown Wilmington, Mrs. Crawford noticed something unusual. Why are there so many people out tonight? Indeed, the sidewalks were crowded with people heading in the same direction they were driving. Michael smiled. It's a special night in Wilmington. When they arrived at the Ruby Crawford Literacy Center, Mrs. Crawford gasped. The building was lit up beautifully, with a red ribbon stretched across the front doors. A crowd had gathered on the street, held back by velvet ropes. "What's happening?" she asked. "The grand opening," Michael explained. "Tonight seemed fitting, don't you think? From the high school library to your very own literacy center." Keith helped Mrs. Crawford from the SUV. The crowd cheered when they saw her, many holding signs that read, "Thank you, Mrs. Crawford," and "Books Change Lives." Michael led her to a small podium set up in front of the ribbon. "Would you like to say a few words before we cut the ribbon?" Mrs. Crawford nodded, overwhelmed but determined. She addressed the crowd briefly, thanking them for coming and expressing her hope that the center would help many people discover the joy and power of reading. Then, with Michael beside her, she cut the ribbon to officially open the Ruby Crawford Literacy Center. Camera flashes captured the moment as the crowd cheered. "Now it's really yours," Michael said, handing her a set of keys. "Your legacy and brick and mortar." Mrs. Crawford looked up at the beautiful building with her name displayed prominently above the entrance. "It's wonderful, Michael. Truly wonderful. Is this the big surprise you've been planning?" Michael shook his head, a mysterious smile playing on his lips. "No, Mrs. Crawford. The real surprise comes tomorrow morning." "More surprises?" Mrs. Crawford sighed with mock exasperation. "Michael Jordan, you are incorrigible." "Another vocabulary word you taught me," Michael laughed. "And yes, there's one more surprise, the biggest one of all." After the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Michael escorted Mrs. Crawford through the Literacy Center, showing her the carefully designed spaces. Children's reading rooms with colorful cushions and low bookshelves. Adult literacy classrooms equipped with computers and learning resources. A community room for book clubs and author visits. "It's even more beautiful than in the photos," Mrs. Crawford said, running her hand along a shelf of brand-new children's books. "The best part is this," Michael said, leading her to a wall near the entrance. It featured a large display titled "The Notebook Legacy," with photos of Mrs. Crawford throughout her teaching career. In the center was a glass case containing the original blue notebook Michael had kept all these years. "I'm just lending it for the display," Michael clarified. "That notebook stays with me," Mrs. Crawford smiled, touched by the gesture. "As it should." By the time they finished the tour, she was visibly tired. The emotions and activities of the day had taken their toll. "Time to get you home," Michael said. "Big day tomorrow." "Are you finally going to tell me what this last surprise is?" Mrs. Crawford asked as Keith drove them back to her newly renovated house. Michael shook his head. "Just be ready at 9 a.m. Wear something comfortable but nice." "You and your secrets," Mrs. Crawford sighed, but her eyes twinkled with anticipation. The next morning, Keith arrived promptly at 9 a.m. Mrs. Crawford was waiting on her porch, dressed in a comfortable blue pantsuit with sensible shoes, a concession to her still healing hip. "Good morning, Mrs. Crawford," Keith greeted her cheerfully. "Ready for the big day?" "I would be if I knew what it was," she replied with a chuckle. Keith helped her into the SUV. "Mr. Jordan asked me to give you this," he said, handing her an I-bind pool envelope. Inside was a note in Michael's handwriting. "Mrs. Crawford, today's journey may seem mysterious, but it will all make sense soon. Trust me, as I once trusted you. First stop, my office in Charlotte. There's something there you need to see." Mrs. Crawford raised an eyebrow. "Charlotte, that's over 3 hours away." Keith nodded. "Yes, ma'am. But Mr. Jordan has arranged for us to take his private plane. We'll be there in under an hour." 30 minutes later, they arrived at a small private airfield where a sleek jet waited on the tarmac. The words Air Jordan were emblazoned on the side, making Mrs. Crawford laugh. "Of course his plane would be called that," she said, as Keith helped her up the steps. The interior was luxurious but tasteful. Mrs. Crawford settled into a butter-soft leather seat, amazed at this glimpse into Michael's life. A flight attendant offered her refreshments, treating her with the deference usually reserved for dignitaries. "I feel like the Queen of England," Mrs. Crawford whispered to Keith. The short flight to Charlotte was smooth. When they landed, another SUV was waiting to take them to Michael's office in uptown Charlotte. Mrs. Crawford had never visited Michael's headquarters before. The modern building housed his business empire, the Charlotte Hornets basketball team he owned, his Jordan brand company, and his philanthropic foundation. In the lobby, a security guard was expecting them. "Mrs. Crawford, welcome," he said, respectfully. "Mr. Jordan is waiting for you in his office on the top floor." The elevator whisked them upward. When the doors opened, Mrs. Crawford found herself in an elegant reception area with a stunning view of the Charlotte skyline. A young woman greeted her immediately. "Mrs. Crawford, I'm Madison, Mr. Jordan's assistant. It's an honor to meet you. He speaks of you often." Madison led her through a set of double doors into Michael's private office. The large room was tastefully decorated with memorabilia from his career. Championship trophies, framed jerseys, and photos with presidents and celebrities. But what caught Mrs. Crawford's eye was the small blue notebook sitting prominently on his desk. Michael rose from his chair, smiling broadly. "Mrs. Crawford, welcome to my world." "It's quite a world," she replied, looking around in amazement. Michael gave her a tour of his office, pointing out meaningful items: his first NBA contract, a basketball from his championship-winning shot against Utah, family photos of his children and grandchildren. Then he gestured toward a small blue box on his desk, the same type of box that had contained her gold basketball necklace. "Another gift?" Mrs. Crawford asked. "The most important one," Michael confirmed, handing it to her. "Open it." Inside was a key, similar to the one for the Literacy Center, but newer and smaller. "What's this for?" she asked. Michael smiled mysteriously. "You'll see. But first, I want to show you something else." He pressed a button on his desk, and a panel in the wall slid open to reveal a hidden room. Michael led Mrs. Crawford inside. It was a small, private space, part meditation room, part personal museum. The walls were lined with his most treasured possessions, things not for public display. "This is my sanctuary," Michael explained. "When decisions are tough or pressure is high, I come here to remember who I am and where I came from." Mrs. Crawford was touched by his willingness to share such a private space. She noticed a glass case in the center of the room containing a familiar object, a red UNC notebook. "The college notebook I gave you," she said softly. Michael nodded. Right next to it is the NBA notebook I bought myself after you taught me the habit. And next to that is the business notebook I used when planning to buy the Hornets. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Your lesson about writing things down, capturing goals and dreams on paper, it became a lifelong practice that helped me succeed in every arena. Not just basketball, but business and life. Mrs. Crawford blinked back tears. I had no idea. Few people do, Michael said. That's why this room is private. But there's one more thing I want to show you. He led her back to his main office and picked up a framed document from his desk. It was a letter, typed on official stationery, dated 6 months earlier. I wrote to the president, Michael explained, telling him about an extraordinary teacher from Wilmington, North Carolina, who changed my life and countless others. I nominated you for the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Mrs. Crawford gasped. Michael, no. Yes, he said firmly. And this is the response. He handed her the framed letter. It confirmed that Ruby Crawford had been selected to receive the nation's highest civilian honor at a White House ceremony the following month. This can't be real, Mrs. Crawford whispered, her hands trembling as she held the letter. It's very real, Michael assured her. The president himself called to tell me the selection committee was moved by your story. They said teachers like you are national treasures. Mrs. Crawford sat down heavily, overwhelmed by the news. I'm just a simple English teacher from Wilmington. You're much more than that, Michael said gently. You're proof that one person can change thousands of lives through kindness, belief, and wisdom. He knelt beside her chair. Remember the key I gave you? It's to a suite at the Hay Adams Hotel in Washington, D.C., where you'll stay for the ceremony. Your niece from Atlanta and your nephew from Boston will join you. All expenses paid. Mrs. Crawford could barely process this information. The Presidential Medal of Freedom? Michael, only the most distinguished Americans receive that honor. Exactly, Michael said with a smile. And you are certainly distinguished. The woman who helped shape Michael Jordan deserves nothing less. As the reality of this honor began to sink in, Mrs. Crawford looked at Michael with new understanding. From the shy sophomore she had encouraged decades ago, he had become not just a basketball legend, but a man of extraordinary generosity and depth. This isn't just about me, is it? She asked perceptively. It's about valuing teachers, showing the world that what happens in classrooms matters. Michael nodded. Exactly. Your story needs to be told, Mrs. Crawford, not just in Wilmington, but nationally. The world needs to be reminded that sometimes the most meaningful acts are small ones, like giving a disappointed 15-year-old boy a notebook and telling him to write down his dreams. Mrs. Crawford's eyes filled with tears as the full circle of their journey together became clear. She had given a young Michael words to express his determination. Now, the man he'd become was using his influence to give her recognition beyond anything she could have imagined. Thank you doesn't seem adequate, she said softly. Michael smiled. That's exactly how I felt when I decided to find you after all these years. But here's the beautiful thing about gratitude, Mrs. Crawford. When expressed sincerely, it's always enough. Mrs. Crawford carefully folded the presidential letter and handed it back to Michael. I never taught for recognition or rewards, she said softly. Just seeing my students succeed was always enough. I know, Michael replied. That's exactly why you deserve this honor. He helped her to her feet and guided her back to the main area of his office. There's one more aspect to my surprise, he said, checking his watch. We have a lunch reservation, and there's someone special I want you to meet." They took the elevator down to the ground floor, where Keith was waiting with the SUV. The drive through uptown Charlotte was short, ending at an elegant restaurant called the Fig Tree. Housed in a restored 1913 craftsman bungalow, it was one of the city's finest dining establishments. "Fancy place," Mrs. Crawford commented as Keith helped her from the vehicle. "Only the best for you," Michael said with a smile. Inside, the maitre d' led them to a private dining room in the back of the restaurant. Mrs. Crawford noticed that Michael seemed unusually nervous, checking his phone repeatedly and glancing toward the door. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Yes, just waiting for our guest to arrive," Michael explained. As if on cue, the door opened, and a distinguished-looking man in his 70s entered. He had salt-and-pepper hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and walked with the slight stoop of someone who had spent decades bending over students' desks. Mrs. Crawford stared at him in shock. Coach Herring, Clifton, Pop. Herring, Michael's former basketball coach, who had cut him from the varsity team in his sophomore year, smiled warmly at Mrs. Crawford. "Ruby Crawford," he said, his voice raspy with age. "It's been a long time." Michael stood to shake Coach Herring's hand. There was a moment of awkwardness as the three of them contemplated their shared history. The coach who cut Michael, the teacher who encouraged him, and the boy who used that disappointment as fuel to become the greatest basketball player of all time. "Please, sit down," Michael said, gesturing to the chair beside Mrs. Crawford. As they settled in, Mrs. Crawford studied Coach Herring's face. He had aged considerably since his coaching days, lines of hardship etched around his eyes. She knew he had faced health challenges over the years, including the schizophrenia diagnosis that had eventually ended his coaching career. "How have you been, Clifton?" she asked gently. "Good days and bad days," he replied honestly. "But more good than bad lately." Michael explained that he had reconnected with Coach Herring a few years earlier. Despite the famous story of being cut from the team, Michael harbored no ill will toward his former coach. In fact, he had been quietly helping with Herring's medical expenses for years. "Coach Herring made the right decision when he cut me," Michael said. "I wasn't ready for varsity. That decision pushed me to work harder than I ever would have otherwise." The elderly coach shook his head. "I've told Michael 100 times. I didn't see what was coming. I missed the greatness in him. But you saw it, Ruby. You always had that gift with students." Mrs. Crawford reached over and patted Coach Herring's hand. "We all see different things in children. You saw who Michael was then. I saw who he could become. Between the two of us, he got both the push and the support he needed." Their lunch arrived, gourmet dishes carefully prepared by the chef, who had come out personally to meet Michael. As they ate, the three of them reminisced about Laney High in the late 1970s, the teachers, the students, the basketball games that had drawn the whole community together. "Do you remember the championship game against New Hanover High?" Coach Herring asked, his eyes lighting up with the memory. "Michael scored 30 points, and you were in the front row, Ruby, jumping up and down and shouting like a teenager." Mrs. Crawford laughed. "I most certainly was not. I was cheering enthusiastically, but with appropriate dignity." "You were standing on the bleachers," Michael confirmed with a grin. "I remember because you were wearing that bright yellow dress that made you look like a sunflower." "Well," Mrs. Crawford sniffed, "it was an exciting game." As their meal concluded, Michael grew more serious. "I asked Coach Herring to join us today for a reason," he explained. "I wanted both of you to be part of a special announcement." He pulled out his phone and pulled up a video. "This is going to air nationally tonight on ESPN, ABC, and several other networks. I wanted you both to see it first. He pressed play. The screen showed Michael sitting in his office, looking directly at the camera. "My name is Michael Jordan," the recorded Michael began, "and I'm announcing today the creation of the Classroom Champions Foundation with an initial endowment of $100 million. This foundation will recognize and reward extraordinary teachers across the country who change students' lives through belief, encouragement, and dedication." The video continued, explaining that each year, the foundation would select 100 teachers nationwide to receive $50,000 awards and professional development opportunities. Schools with winning teachers would receive additional funding for literacy programs, mentoring initiatives, and student support services. The first classroom champion, video Michael continued, is Mrs. Ruby Crawford of Wilmington, North Carolina, the teacher who changed my life when I was a disappointed sophomore who had just been cut from the varsity basketball team. The QR video showed photos of young Michael, Laney High School, and Mrs. Crawford in her classroom. It told their story briefly but powerfully, ending with a call for nominations of other transformative teachers. When the video ended, Mrs. Crawford was speechless. Coach Herring wiped a tear from his eye. "That's going to inspire a lot of people," the coach said quietly. Michael nodded. "That's the goal. To remind everyone that sometimes the person who changes your life isn't the one in the spotlight. Sometimes it's the quiet one in the classroom who believes in you when you don't believe in yourself." Mrs. Crawford finally found her voice. $100 million, Michael? For teachers? It's a start, Michael said simply. We'll raise more. Every corporate partner I've approached has been enthusiastic. Everyone had a teacher who made a difference in their life. He took Mrs. Crawford's hand. "You taught me that words have power. Now, I want to use my platform and resources to make sure teachers like you get the recognition and support they deserve." Mrs. Crawford looked from Michael to Coach Herring and back again. These two men, one who had challenged Michael through disappointment, one who had championed him through determination, were both part of the story that had shaped the legend. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't need to say anything," Michael assured her. "Just help me make this foundation something special. I need your wisdom, your experience. No one knows better than you what makes a teacher truly transformative." Coach Herring raised his water glass. "To Mrs. Crawford, who saw the champion inside the boy." Michael raised his glass as well. "And to Coach Herring, who gave me something to prove." Mrs. Crawford looked at the two men, her former colleague and her former student, and felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun in a high school classroom nearly 5 decades ago had come full circle in ways none of them could have imagined. "To both of you," she said, raising her own glass, "for showing me that sometimes our greatest impact comes in ways we never expect." As they finished their lunch, Michael's phone buzzed with messages about the Presidential Medal of Freedom ceremony. Arrangements were being made, schedules coordinated. "I can't believe this is really happening," Mrs. Crawford said, still trying to process everything. Michael smiled. "Believe it. After all, you taught me that believing is the first step to achieving." "Another vocabulary lesson put to good use," Mrs. Crawford replied with a twinkle in her eye. As they prepared to leave, Michael handed Mrs. Crawford a small package wrapped in blue paper. "One last gift," he said. Inside was a brand new blue notebook, identical to the one he had received as a 15-year-old. On the first page, Michael had written, "Dear Mrs. Crawford, now it's your turn to write a new chapter. Your story is still unfolding, and the best pages are yet to be written." With eternal gratitude, Michael Mrs. Crawford held the notebook close. To her heart, too moved to speak. After all these years, the teacher had become the student, and the student had become the teacher. And together, they were about to change education in America. Some dreams were too big, even for notebooks. But as Mrs. Crawford had taught Michael long ago, that's exactly the kind of dreams worth pursuing. Where are you listening from? I'd love to know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story about gratitude, second chances, and the powerful impact teachers have on our lives, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We share heartwarming stories like this one every week. Don't forget to share this video with friends and family who might need a reminder about the difference one person can make. Together, we can spread kindness and awareness about the unsung heroes in classrooms everywhere. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the person who changes your life isn't the one in the spotlight, but the quiet one who believes in you when you don't believe in yourself. See you in the next story.